People who cater to the super rich. What things have you seen? When rich people want to buy a Jaguar in the UK, they get assigned a special salesperson who's incredibly knowledgeable. They meet in a special fancy office, and special arrangements can be made. This was my friend Chris's job. He had access to things that a normal Jaguar salesperson wouldn't have, like he could ring up the manager of the factory for special requests level of access. Well, a Saudi prince wanted to buy this new Jaguar that had been released, so they met up and spent a full day speccing the Jaguar out. I believe the final price was something like $125K for the vehicle. Then came the decision for color. At the time, the factory had 16 different color choices for this model. The prince asked if he could sleep on it as it was getting late and almost time for dinner/prayer. My friend Chris says of course, and they set a time to meet the next morning. The next morning, the Saudi prince is like, I figured out an acceptable solution to my color dilemma. To which Chris goes, and what would that be? The Saudi prince goes, I'll order one of each color. And my friend Chris is like, oh, well, of course. They quote delivery time. Saudi prince was fine and asked for his options and was presented with ocean travel options, to which the prince said, what about air cargo? Chris, thinking maybe they'd do 1 or 2 by air cargo and the rest by boat, the prince was like, no, I want all 16 vehicles loaded on a plane and flown to Saudi Arabia. So that's the story on how 16 of the same Jaguar with different colors ended up being flown to Saudi Arabia. All in the total cost was around $2.5 million. Please note the prices should be euros, not dollars. Story 2. My great-uncle was very well off. He did not have a guest house. It was a guest mansion, separate from his mansion, in case his kids drop by. This does not include the Olympic-sized indoor pool. That was a separate building. He bought a cannon. He used it to shoot the mountain behind his house. He shot brand new special bowling balls out of it. They cost $100 per ball. Edit. I'm not sure of the actual size of the pool, but it was definitely bigger than most community pools. But if you want to see the cannon in action, Nitro Circus came by and shot a car with it in one of their episodes. I didn't expect this comment to explode, so I didn't mention the human slingshot. There have been a few viral videos made about it. Story 3. Have been working for the super rich for some time. Craziest thing I've seen. Brand new 90-meter, multi-million-pound (GBP) yacht was built in the Netherlands. Maiden voyage to Antibes in France. Owner came on board and left after a few hours. Next week we get sent to Genoa, Italy, where all the bathrooms on board were ripped out and upgraded. That doesn't sound like a big deal, but I'm talking about brand new marble sinks, showers, floors, and lobbies, all crowbarred out, chucked in skips. Tons of brand new polished marble binned. New marble colors and patterns arrived in the weeks following. There's feed me money, there's FU money, and there's it's not even a thought money. Story 4. I used to work for a company that modified aircraft for really rich people. I'm talking 747s, not Gulfstreams. This company had made several aircraft for this one customer, who I was told had purchased a new one solely because his spiritual advisor had told him that one of his current planes was bad luck. He still let his wife use it for her personal travel. To me, one of the most exquisite features of these planes wasn't the gold-plated everything, or rare wood veneers. It was the silk carpet. The stuff cost over $1,000 per square foot and feels like walking on a bed of angel feathers harvested in the most inhumane way possible. Granted, these guys don't deck out the whole plane, just their personal areas. The aft third is usually reserved for staff and such, and is more like a fancy economy class. But yeah, silk carpet. Story 5. Some kids have whole plans and strategies they practice to prevent being kidnapped or harmed by crazy stalkers. One kid I worked with was the kid of a big Hollywood player, and people would stalk the kid in an attempt to get to the parent. So this nut job, wielding a screenplay, broke in and cornered the kid. Here I am thinking I'm going to have to throw myself physically between them, but the kid dove into a nearby dog kennel and locked themselves in. He couldn't get out, but the nut job couldn't get in either. So the nutjob just threw the screenplay at him into the kennel. Meanwhile, I had called the cops. I was so impressed by the kid's quick thinking and asked how he got the idea. But he said that he always keeps an eye out for a way to escape, and when he sees someone he doesn't know approach, he gets ready to run. I felt awful that this kid had to live like that. If I hadn't seen it happen myself, I would have thought it was just paranoia. Story 6. I worked for the sister of a billionaire doing odd jobs that eventually turned into doing the same for her friends and family. People in the single-digit millions spend recklessly, always trying to show off their wealth. People in the double-digit millions are a mixed bag. People in the 100 million to 1 billion range were incredibly interesting because the ones I worked for were incredibly frugal. If you took away the business aspect, they were normal people, not pretentious a-holes. They didn't really care about appearances anymore. They drank $50 bottles of liquor, not $1,000 scotches. They preferred pizza to a catered meal. They bought the home with the best view, not the biggest home. Their big purchases were also investments. Own a PGA course, but use $2,000 set of clubs because they like the fit. Make a $50 million deal in khaki shorts, sandals, and a t-shirt. Never did I hear a raised voice. Every request was prefaced with please, and often thanked genuinely. I was incredibly shocked, not the demeanor I anticipated. That leads me to the most common thing I saw. Terrible kids. Just absolute abominations of people. Terrible, demanding, and not worthy of the empires their parents built. So I suppose it could be argued that the reason why these people have $100 million to $1 billion is because they're frugal and they don't just blow their money on, anything that they can see with their own two eyes. So you're making a lot of money and you're not spending a lot of money, and that's just bound to accumulate over time. Also, totally agree. The kids are the absolute worst. Spoiled brats. Story 7. I worked for a member of a Forbes 40 richest families. The wealth went back generations. He was a truly great human being. He'd spent his career running a Fortune 500 company, then spent his retirement in public service. He worked harder than anyone I've ever known and didn't care at all, ever, about impressing anyone. He served his guests cheddar cheese goldfish as a cocktail snack and had an elderly housekeeper who cooked the most basic things imaginable: hot dog casserole, creamed chicken over rice, liver and onions, etc., for whomever came to dinner. I once sat between a secretary of the treasury and the president of a foreign country as they happily wolfed down the basic country food provided by the housekeeper. You could see how grateful they were to not get another overly complicated fancy dinner. My boss wore old hats, carried a briefcase he'd had for 30 years, and every winter helped people push their car out of the snow. He drank Old Taylor bourbon, smoked Cuban cigars when they weren't legal, and drove around in a Mercury Tracer wagon for years after I crashed his BMW. Whoops. He just lived his life and made his choices without worrying about what people would think. He was wonderful to his staff and literally became my godfather, since his example and encouragement led me to a career as a minister, despite my family's strong objections. When he was in his 90s, and a year before he died, I visited him and introduced him to my spouse. He took her hand and said, "I've loved MD Account for a very long time. I hope you'll let me love you too." Now and again, someone who's very, very rich still understands what's of true value. Edit to add bonus story. Thanks for all the various awards, which obviously go to my old boss. I wanted to add that he also never let dignity get in the way of having fun. We were once leaving a congressional office building, which required taking an elevator down to the basement, then making our way past huge stacks of materials fresh from the printer's office. So, several stories up, we wait for the elevator and two of them arrive at the same time. I try to brace, knowing what's coming. I get shoved back as he leaps into an elevator yelling, "Race you!" and hammers on the closed door button. He's 65 years old. I jump into the other elevator just as its doors are closing, and miraculously get a small head start. My advantage disappears, however, when my elevator stops on a lower floor to take on another passenger, a very high-ranking and famous member of Congress. Silently, we ride together to the basement, and when the doors open, my boss is nowhere to be seen, even though he definitely beat me. I follow the famous congressman toward the exit, and as we reach the first towering pile of boxes, my old boss comes leaping out from behind it with a war cry of victory, landing right in front of the now very freaked out congressman I'd been following. It was glorious to watch my old boss try to explain what the hell he was doing, especially since he kept breaking up in laughter the whole time. Story 8. As a chauffeur and ski companion for a mega rich guy's daughter, he sent me out to buy her a birthday present for when she turned 17, I think it was. This was way back in the 70s. So I got her a new BMW 2002 and told the dealer to charge it to the guy, which was cool, and later the dealer offered me an absolute deal on a trade and that the usual cream puff only driven to church on Sundays. $500 for a really good late model used car, but an American car they never dealt in. Much later on, about 30 years later, I was working with an architect building a home for another mega rich guy, and the library was to be paneled in knotty pine. Guy's wife arrived when it was almost completely trimmed out and says, "Too many knots." So we ripped out the whole interior, and the guy, who owned several sawmills, sent back to the mill to ship another truckload so we could select the boards under the wife's direction. And same wife, same building, could not figure out how to turn the car around in the triple-wide driveway, so he had a turntable installed in the garage, so all she had to do was miss the edges of the door on the way in or out. Story 9. I tutored a wealthy 5-year-old. I got paid good money to spend an hour drawing and coloring and playing with this kindergartner, but all in French. He had been to more places in the world by 5 than I'll ever go to in my whole lifetime probably. The best part of the job were the perks though. They would take me and my SO out to dinner at fancy restaurants and pay the bill no matter what it was. They would invite us over to eat some delicacy they prepared. Wife was Chinese/Vietnamese, husband was Indian, and they'd always have some house guest staying with some crazy resume. For example, one time they had a diplomat for the Netherlands there to do business. They had houses in my city and in San Francisco and would fly there all the time. They invited me on several occasions, but I never had time to go. I also befriended and stayed with the daughter of Russian oligarchs who lived in Paris. The mom was a famous writer and the dad did something in business. Their grandfather was a famous Soviet writer, and so in general, they lived a very cultured life. They lived in the richest part of Paris called Neuilly-sur-Seine and had houses in the Alps, Crimea, and Moscow. The crazy part, or rather sad part, was that she only had a few options for a career. She could be a doctor, a lawyer, or a businesswoman. Their son was lucky enough to study at the Geneva Conservatory, but that was only because he was really talented. In this family, if you didn't have a natural artistic talent, you only had those 3 career prospects to choose from. I had the impression that she was rather depressed about how limited her options were and how much pressure was put on her to succeed. Story 10. I've worked for some of the richest people in Maryland, and the one thing that stands out more than others is this doctor I worked for in Montgomery County. It's one of the most affluent zip codes in America. Anyway, this guy owned a crapload of offices around the DC area, tons of employees and associate doctors, etc. Guy was seriously loaded. Huge garage full of super expensive cars, like multiple Ferraris, art collection, wine cellar, the works. I used to do IT work for his medical practice and manage all the servers and stuff, and occasionally went to their house because I was the lead admin. I once was working in his house and was walking around upstairs where the bedrooms were. I crap you not, this guy was laying in bed being fed by an assistant. Like, he was literally laying in bed while someone hand-fed him. And not like grapes, but a regular meal. It was effing weird as crap. Imagine someone feeding you a full meal like a steak and spoons of soup, salad, etc., and you never used your hands. It was like an adult being fed like a baby. It seemed like Saddam Hussein type crap. I've never seen anything like that before, and that was what popped into my mind. Like a dictator or something who demands to be treated like a literal king. There was nothing sexual about it. Keep in mind, this was a man in his 50s who was in fine physical shape and didn't need a caregiver. It was just pure opulence. Then, one time I was working in the kitchen area and his young son, probably late teens/early 20s, came walking past me and stunk to high heaven of pot, which I'm totally cool with and we joked about. He went to the kitchen and poured an IPA into a glass and went back to his room. This was at 9 a.m., lol. I thought it was hysterical. He was a cool kid from my interactions with him. Probably just figured my dad is rich as crap, so I don't have to worry about anything. So he was totally laid back. I've got some other strange things, but that is by far the strangest. Story 11. I've worked with some fairly wealthy people in the developing world. More or less new money people who have been successful with some business venture or other. Overall, they're a bit out of touch with the realities of the world. I used to think that they were a bit naive too, because I saw a lot of other people taking advantage of them/outright robbing them. Over time, I realized while that's not untrue, it's more complicated. They did fail to notice a lot of uncollegiate activity on the part of the people they hired, but not all of it. What they did notice, they wrote off as the cost of finding people they could trust with projects that were actually important to them and work with for years. So yeah, you could overbill them for a few $1,000s once or twice, but if you worked hard and produced results instead, you could bootstrap your whole business to the next level with just them as a client. Eventually, I realized they valued trust a lot more than they valued money. They made their money with fairly long-term, high-risk, high-reward ventures running in parallel, e.g. research, so it all makes a little more sense now. I know plenty of rich, useless people too, but not very well. A lot of wealth is simply inherited in Asia. Cash flow is a really difficult thing here. Some people think they're important because they're born rich and act like fools. They do some pretty wild stuff, but I don't stick around to hear about it. Story 12. My mother worked at a prominent casino where Tiger Woods had special instructions for certain hallway cameras to go offline at certain times. Spoiler, he was having his 3 local girls visit him. Edit. Another fun one is Mike Tyson. My mother said he was maybe 5'8". Also super funny and sweet to her. She said his lisp is very pronounced and that it still took her by surprise. She also said his hands were the size of small boulders. I guess I wasn't that crazy. Edit 2. The dudes from Whose Line were very low-key in their visits. They were all about privacy, but were incredibly gracious to my mom when she spoke to them. She asked Colin if Ryan was there also, and he said, yeah, he went out to get my hair. Hopefully he's back soon. She said Greg was really excited to talk to her and spent almost 45 minutes going over her life. System kid who joined the Navy, got Cat 5 clearance, and raised 4 kids by herself. Story 13. Had a classmate whose father or mother was filthy rich from family money, can't remember, but they and he were amazing people. In uni, this girl in class, who was really nice but also came from a poor family, dropped her MacBook. She worked 60 hours a week for 3 months in the summer. He just came up, gave her his MacBook, and said he would just get a new one after school and his parents wouldn't care. Pure generosity. There was no TikTok movie or karma whoring going on. He was a stellar dude spending his parents' money, but only on stuff for other people and in a nice, helpful way. He also gave all the guys in class a suit for graduation. Lots of the people were talking about renting one and stuff, and he told everybody he knew a place to rent real nice suits. We all went there and we all rented a suit for 100 euros or so, everything included, and when you went to return it, we found out they were all paid for by this dude. He was like, renting a suit is stupid, but buying a suit is expensive. Now you got the best of both worlds. Last thing, I heard he bought like 10 PS5s from scalpers and sold them for retail to kids in the neighborhood. I should have stayed friends with him. Story 14. I used to do a pool and spa maintenance in my 20s. I worked on one property with a mountainside, 10-bedroom, 14-bath mansion with a saltwater pool, tennis courts, guest mansion, and a servant's house that was 4-bedroom, 5-bath. The property had so much more stuff, but that isn't the crazy thing. I worked on this property for 2 years, year-round, 5 days a week, and not a single person was ever there. The middle-aged single woman that owned it lived in a city about 4 hours away and just didn't come to the property because she was so busy with work. A multi-million dollar compound, just empty, all the time. Finally, after 2 years, I got a call from my boss on my day off. He asked if I could go to the house to put some pool floats away. He apologized because it was my day off, but said the owner would pay me $500 to go put them away. I was confused as to why there were even pool floats out anyway, because nobody was ever there, but I figured, F it, $500 for 10 minutes. I show up to the house and the woman's adult children were staying at the house with about 10 plus kids between them all, and they were having a massive pool party / cookout. I awkwardly walked up and said to one of the parents, sorry, it must have been a mistake, but I was told to come put pool floats away, but you're obviously here, so I'll leave. Presumably, the woman's adult son said, oh no, we're getting ready to leave. You can take them. He then instructed the kids to push them towards me. I literally grabbed one inner tube float and 4 pool noodles, brought them 10 feet into the pool house and put them away. I confusedly said they were all set and went to leave. The son thanked me and handed me a folded mass of $20 bills. It was $400. I was expecting $500 from my boss for payment, but I figured $400 cash was still overpayment, so I didn't mention it. The next day at work, my boss gave me $1,000. I told him the son had already paid me $400, which was fine. He said the son told the woman how great a job I did, so he wanted to pay me $1,000 instead of $500, and the $400 was a tip from her son. For 10 minutes of work, she actually called my boss the next day to ask if she should reimburse me for gas, since it was 15 minutes from my house. I told them that I was all set. Story 15. My niece married to an absurdly rich guy. His quirk, he did absolutely everything possible to hide his fortune. Simple clothes, normal car, decent but not lavish house, self-allowance. Guy literally hates his fellow multimillionaires in the guts. He told a story when he was really into Formula 1. His dad bought him a karting track. Long story short, the guy got really good and won several small championships, earning a spot in a training camp with some of the current Formula 1 pros. As soon as they realized he came from money, the would-be trainers, other kids, and pretty much everyone started treating him differently, basically saying he's not good enough and that he will be paid for to become a F1 pilot. The story repeated itself many times over from Oxford University, where the guy went to learn earning a scholarship, not by simply paying, to pretty much every business deal where people were trying to get way more simply because he's filthy rich and can afford it. Gold diggers who were ready to satisfy every adult dream of his, only to get into the money, etc., etc. Instead of becoming a cynical a-hole version of Scrooge, he and his family just hid that they have wealth. They wanted normal lives and honest human interactions. Story 6. I clean houses, and I've learned that generally, the more money they have, the nastier they are. One couple had 6 bathrooms. I cleaned once a month and every single toilet would be decimated. Dried diarrhea down the sides, on the seats, on the effing flusher handle, globs of toothpaste everywhere. They had a huge walk-in closet with a lidless trash can. It was filled to the top with piss-soaked adult diapers. No lid. The whole closet reeked of piss. Even their clothing. The kitchen was, let's just say I had to spray everything down with cleaner and let it sit while I cleaned another area. Then I had to use a scraper to get the counters clean. They literally never wiped them down after cooking/eating. Appliances and sink weren't any better. Another lady had a fondness for butt plugs. Problem is that she didn't clean them. She'd toss it in the nightstand drawer and buy a new one. I know this because she left the drawer open once. There were a dozen or more very used, very dirty butt plugs in there, caked in dried crap. People are effing gross. I refuse to clean for the wealthy anymore. No amount of money is worth a hazmat situation. Story 17. So I used to work on luxury cruise ships. The best thing I saw was the vice president of Goldman Sachs' wife and kids had a suite for an Iceland cruise. They spent about $75K on this cruise. Literally, the second day of the cruise, they looked so uncomfortable and upset. They had a private jet come pick them up so they could go shopping in London. They said everyone was too old on the ship and they hated it. They literally burned $75K with no regrets and were total spoiled brats about it. I would never want to be like that. Edit. I'm just gonna add, since no one gets what I'm trying to say, and all everyone is saying is, well, yeah, that sounds miserable. I would leave too. No, you would not. It was the first day. This is an ultra-luxury expedition cruise to Iceland. The tours and excursions are incredible and unmatched. It's fine dining as well as the most comfortable you would ever be, which is why it's so expensive. It was the first day of the cruise. They literally left right after to go shopping in London, which is not nearly as enjoyable. Imagine being this spoiled rotten. I would hate to live like that. Also, this was 2 years ago. I remember Googling their name. He was definitely high up in Goldman Sachs, worth multi-millions. He was not on the ship. It was just his wife and 2 daughters. Story 18. I worked for UPS for a hot minute as a driver helper and got to see some interesting things. The one driver had the rich of the rich route. The mansions worth tens of millions around the Ann Arbor, Michigan area. The Ford mansion, Lloyd Carr, the one recent guy for Michigan football that I'm forgetting that also worked for Little Caesars. Edit. The name I was forgetting was Dave Brandon. Anyway, I got to see Dave Brandon's mansion. It was gated, deep in the woods, and absolutely huge. The driver, a 33-year UPS veteran, told me these guys with these huge mansions like this, they don't live there by themselves. Sometimes don't live there at all. They move their entire extended families in there. Parents, sisters, brothers, aunts, uncles, cousins, etc. And they all live off the rich guy's dime, ordering whatever they want whenever they feel like it. I think we delivered 30 or 40 packages there that one day. Second story from the same day and with the same driver, we delivered to a smaller but still huge house with an extremely long and wooded driveway. The driver was cursing about how much he hated these people because they always park this huge-ass boat in the only possible turnaround point in the driveway. So he goes in backwards and floors it, maybe 40 mph backwards, about 250 yards of bends, straights, and he drove it absolutely perfectly, never driving off or missing the driveway. We get to the house and he needed a signature. He handed me the package and said he'll get the signature and just hand him the package and we'll go. Well, we get to the door and this maybe late 40s or early 50s man, kind of a Rick Moranis / George Costanza type of build, short, extremely thick glasses, balding but very skinny build. He's standing in the front door with a lab-looking dog on a leash. The driver says, "Good evening, we just need a signature and we'll be on our way." The guy says, "No, I can't. I have to take my dog out first." This effing guy was fully prepared to make us stand there and wait for his dog to do whatever business before signing his name and letting us drop the package by his door. The driver said, "No, we just need your signature, and we'll be on our way, and you can walk your dog." The guy said, "Fine," and took the 2 seconds it takes to sign your name, and we dropped off his package and left. That left an impression on me. That guy valued our time so little, it was worth less than his dog's crap. Like he was in his own world, and we weren't delivering 300 stops just before Christmas. Story 19. I started working for this couple's company and managed to be accepted by their 2 Irish Wolfhound dogs, which the owner said had never happened before with anyone but him and his partner. As a result, they hired me to come over after work to brush, walk, medicate, and feed the dogs, as well as come over, take one of their high-end spare cars to pick up bulk orders of diced mouton, we're talking 100 kilograms plus at the time, from a butcher they liked on the other side of town. They gave me the keys to their heritage-listed home in a posh area while they were away, so I could take care of the dogs and sleep over if I wanted. They were both absolutely lovely people, money rich but time poor, and always treated me with great respect and friendliness. They brought a brand new Toyota Troop carrier for the dogs to travel in, as 2 wolfhounds would not fit in his Porsche or her Mercedes. I'd load the dogs into the Troopy, and we'd go to a fairly local beach so the dogs could run around and play to their heart's content once a month, splashing around in the sea. Then I'd bring them home, happy and tired, wash them, feed them, tuck them in for the night, and return to my own home. The dogs slept on a huge, fantastically expensive leather sofa on the back deck that had been replaced with a newer, smaller version inside the house. They were always renovating and would ask me to dispose of the old furnishings. I asked if I could use some of them for myself and was always told, "Oh yes, take what you want and dump the rest." They only wanted the stuff gone, and I had their blessings to sell off and keep the proceeds. For someone earning less than $50K a year, this was a godsend, and my tatty old house benefited from their cast-off rugs and furnishings so much. I was grateful, and they were happy, and they had 100% faith and trust in me, which was mind-blowing, especially when I was asked to take over processing the staff wages for the company. Unreal. Thanks, Jeff and Helen. Story 20. The father of a close friend has been the CEO of multiple private banks over the past 15 or so years. These are some of the more absurd things I've seen. I used to go over to his place for sleepovers when we were both younger, think 14, 15, and I remember him just having this entire 1x3 meter shelf stacked full of MacBooks and other Apple products. I think 30 MacBooks and another 20 or so iPhones. Turns out, he would get 2 to 3 laptops and at least 2 phones a year, and when the new year comes round, he'd shelve whatever he had, no matter how great the condition, some barely a month old, and do the same thing over again for the best models. When word that the early batches of iPhone 6s could bend, his younger brother, probably 7 to 8 at the time, managed to bend his by doing a handstand. There was this other time I went for a swim during a party he was hosting. Without hesitation, this man throws his custom Goyard wallet on the very wet poolside floor and jumps in. I just stared at him in disbelief, and he went, "It's just a wallet, doesn't matter." Edit. Just remembered another story from a different family friend. So, the family who this friend comes from owns the largest group of car dealerships in Southeast Asia. Pretty much every brand you can think of, other than Italian cars and Tesla, think we're in his size. She's been stranded in my country due to the pandemic. They're foreigners, and whenever she's feeling homesick, she'll call up the bakery in her home country to place orders, and get said orders flown in on a private plane the next day. Story 21. Was catering a wedding for a very wealthy Nigerian businessman's daughter who was living in the US now. She was marrying a white American whose family looked like that stereotypical Midwest family. The dance floor opens up and it's time for the father-daughter dance, and it turns into the bride dancing fairly suggestively as the dad started throwing cash around, probably like 10K in total, as the Nigerian guest started to collect the fallen money. I don't judge, but it was the funniest crap I ever watched. Imagine all of the Nigerian guests who had been flown in or going wild, and this Midwest extended family just standing there with a look that can only be described as, what the F are we even watching? All the catering staff had been warned about this part of the ceremony by the event planner. She claimed this was customary in Nigerian/West African culture, though having been to West Africa and having even been to a wedding there, I'd never heard of this custom. But clearly the in-laws hadn't been told about it. It was just a surreal experience. Also, having worked a lot of high-end weddings, you learn just how unique each family's specific traditions really are. For example, on my mother's side, whenever the bride and groom kiss, you're expected to hit your glass with your knife, fork, or spoon. Never seen that in any other wedding. Story 22. Don't exactly cater for this man. Well, wasn't supposed to, at least. Harry Treguaboff, owner of Meriton Suites, and Australia's second richest person screamed at me for a few minutes once. I was working in one of the hotels he owns, the primary one in the CBD of Sydney. I was temperature testing at the front door, all staff who were working there given the pandemic. He pulls out the front in a Bentley, and his driver comes outside and opens the door for him. At the time, I had no clue who he was. Without a second of hesitation, the instant he walked through the door, he started screaming, "Where the F is my son? Where is he gone? Have you seen him? Have you?" Now, my role involved not letting anyone into the building unless they'd been screened, but he literally just stormed past screaming at everyone on his way upstairs. Maybe 15 minutes later, he came down with his son. They were having a very casual conversation and just appearing to not acknowledge the absolute chaos he'd caused minutes before. He got into the Bentley with his son, then drove off. Very confusing seeing an 80-year-old billionaire who's so above it all that he can scream at multiple staff, most of whom are his own Meriton staff, notoriously underpaid, then leave without an inch of remorse. A-hole. Story 23. Wealthy people. There's a very nice Safa couple I clean for who have an amazing house that always smells great and doesn't really need regular cleaning. It's always just so nice. Besides some lovely accessories, they don't really have anything particularly spectacular. Just a well-decorated modern home, nice alcohol, business casual, and a nice attitude. Most of our probably very wealthy clients are like this. Meanwhile, we also clean for some rather reckless clients. They're wealthy but don't have FU money. Their houses are usually messier, and they're usually not that pleasant to us either. Nice cars, designer bags, and glasses. Houses look great from the outside, but inside looks like the A-bomb was dropped. Once had a client open a package that was delivered. I think it was a watch, but it was in a big box, so it was hard to tell what it was. She said, "It's a present for my hubby. Probably your monthly salary, right?" She didn't even say it with malice. She just said it casually. Like, had she have said something else in the same tone, it would have seemed pleasant. It's like they don't acknowledge that you're human. The worst bit is, whatever it was probably worth more than my monthly salary. But she doesn't get 50% off DC shoes, so she can suck on those apples. Story 24. When I was younger, my family and I were hired to clean one of the Walton summer homes. Helen Walton visited our house herself, to my surprise, in a beat-up old van in a Walmart tracksuit. It blew my mind. Once at the property, I saw just how rich someone can be. Helen Walton had several original Norman Rockwell paintings hanging up, as well as a fancy-looking spiral staircase. I couldn't help myself, so I inquired about the staircase, and she told me it was some rare red-colored wood. I forget the name now. From Brazil, and that the staircase itself cost, drumroll, $11 million. When cleaning this summer home, I literally was cleaning like I was walking on eggshells for fear of breaking something. The home was in Arkansas, I believe, in a place called War Eagle. This has been over 2 decades ago, on a hillside, and I asked her how much of the property she owned, and she said, as far as you can see, pretty much. She was very kind and treated me and my family with respect, and I even got to attend a Razorbacks basketball game with one of her sons. She said they had purchased the stadium, and the floor was made of some new technology of rubber that helps aid the athletes in jumping or some crap. Again, this was over 2 decades ago. Anyway, that has been my experience with anyone that's super rich, aside from Carrie Underwood. I sat behind her in my oral communications class at university the year she went on American Idol, so she wasn't really super rich yet. By the way, she was an a-hole. Just thought I'd throw that in there. Story 25. I posted this story a long time ago. I'll copy and paste it here. Know a lady who has one of the lifetime first-class passes on American. She has a house in Hawaii and wanted to fly to a city on the mainland, but she doesn't like first class from Hawaii because she had a bad experience one time. So, no problem, she can use her NetJet's private jet, but she doesn't want to pay for it. So, she arranges to make another large donation to her alma mater. She already donated between 10 and 20 million and has her name on an entire school, and so on and so school of whatever. And so she calls the president of the university, makes the arrangements, and suggests that they gave an event for this donation. Just so happens, a decent number of other wealthy alums live in Hawaii, so why don't they all fly over for the event on a larger private jet? And oh, by the way, the university should cover the cost of the charter. I write this in present tense, sort of, because the arrangements are currently being made. TLDR, lady makes huge donation to university out of spite, to avoid flying first class or on her own private jet. Edit 2. Lots of discussion about her motivation for all this. I'll clarify. From what I can tell, it has nothing to do with generosity or a desire just for a free flight. Here's a clarification from farther down the thread. My impression, based on telling me this story, is this. She won't fly American Airlines out of Hawaii, even though she flies first class for free, because she, quote, had a bad experience once a long time ago. Keep in mind she'll fly American other places, just not out of Hawaii. So her alternative is to use one of her NetJets planes. But why would she pay for a charter when it's really the fault of American Airlines? So let's see what she can do. Oh, I know. Let's get someone else to pay for the charter. How about her alma mater, with which she has an excellent relationship already? So she has her office call the president of this university and say she'd like to make another donation. Some arrangements are made, some other people get involved, a whole lot of running around is done by her people, the university's people, the offices of these other wealthy alums, etc. Hell, even my employees will eventually spend some time on this, selling some of her positions to get the cash. Ultimately, she doesn't have to fly American. She doesn't have to spend her money. This is a matter of principle, not economics. She gets a free flight out of Hawaii on a larger jet than she otherwise likely would have, with no more effort than spending a few minutes on a phone that someone handed her. What's the downside? Granted, she's spending a lot more money to do this, but it is, as I've said, literally of no concern. Another thing to keep in mind, obviously, she told me this in a very different tone than I'm relaying it here, lol. Story 26. My favorite story about a rich kid actually involves consequences and lessons learned. I had a friend who was from a wealthy Saudi family, but just wealthy, not super yacht wealthy. He's the eldest son of the family, so he comes to Canada for his university degree, and the expectation is he'll work a few years in banking before returning home to manage the family's business. That all goes according to plan, except after his business degree, he's working the same entry-level banking job that I am, which is a pretty solid job for 22-year-olds, but about 16 levels below what his privileged family would expect someone of their social rank to get, since Canada doesn't quite work like that. Again, he wasn't super rich, or else it would work like that here too, of course. So, after a year or two, his family decides he should just come home. But he was never really the wealthy heir type and quite enjoys Canada and the low-pressure career he's embarked on. He was good at his job, and has even met a lovely, non-Muslim woman. So he wants to stay, and secretly applies for a permanent residency. A few months go by, and time is running out for his application. He finds out his family has been applying pressure to hold it up. After a fight with them, he gives in and agrees to come home. As far as he's concerned, he's leaving Canada forever. So what does he do? Applies for as much credit as he can and runs it to the max. And he gets a decent amount, since he's been in Canada for years, has regular income, etc. He maxes everything out, mostly buying clothes and renting fancy cars, but also donates a bunch to our team's social fund and a friend's charity drive, as well as spending over $1,000 helping our coworker buy their school books for the year. He puts in his resignation. We have a goodbye party. It's all a bit somber and sad. The day before he flies out, he has another argument with his parents. Apparently, his younger brother is also turning away from the family, and has given the parents a softer approach. They agree to let him stay. He gets a visa extension. His family calls the local embassy, and his permanent residency magically gets pushed up and approved. It's honestly a really moving situation to see a conservative religious family really take a step back and evaluate things, and to allow their eldest son to go against their plans and pursue his own happiness. Our company allows him to rescind his resignation. We have another party to welcome him back, and he proposes to his girlfriend, married now for 8 years. So everything is amazing, except the Joker now has credit card debt that's twice his annual salary. Apparently, he was too ashamed of it to even tell his parents what he did, so it was all on him. So for the next 3 years, he had the most amazing suits and ties, lots of fancy customized stuff, and was eating ramen or canned tuna every meal. To his credit though, he worked hard, lived frugally, and paid it all off. Now he has a senior banking job, happy marriage as far as I know, and a strong relationship with his family. Story 27. This didn't happen to me, but to a colleague of mine, so take it with a grain of salt, I guess, who used to be a bouncer at this club that were the place for rich kids to hang out at. Now, he saw a lot of the typical, look at me, I'm so rich, bullcrappery, like buying the most expensive champagne in the club and telling the bartender to pour it down the drain, where wearing several Rolex watches and hand them out like candy to strangers, or tipping the staff thousands of dollars. Occasionally after telling them to do something embarrassing, like barking like a dog or balking like a chicken. But the thing that stuck with him the most was just how far removed these kids were from reality. Case in point, one night he had door duty and didn't let a kid, who was clearly under the influence of something other than mere alcohol, into the club. So what did the kid do? He decided that it was a good idea to take a swing at him. Turns out that it wasn't a good idea, something he quickly found out after he was lying face down on the ground, handcuffed with his hands behind his back. But even now, the kid didn't seem to be too worried. He just kept saying, "It's alright, just call my dad, he'll sort this out," over and over again, and seemed incapable of realizing that he was actually getting arrested for attempted assault. Not even when the police finally arrived and put him in the back of their car did he seem to fully grasp the fact that he was actually in trouble and that his dad wouldn't show up, wave a wand, and make this all go away. Effing rich kids, man. Story 28. Didn't cater to, but worked for someone who was rich. Ended up bankrupting the company that he inherited by overspending on his hobby, automobile racing. Had too many loans taken out to cover the racing expenses. Economy took a dump, the work stopped, couldn't pay back the loans, and lost everything. All because he loved to race cars on the weekends. And from a story that isn't mine, but I have no reason to doubt the source, my old instructor in school was also a general contractor. He swears this is true, but he was hired to have a big mansion built for some random wealthy guy. 5 or 6 years later, he gets a call from the client, asks if he's got the plans for the old house. Contractor says yeah, he has them here. Client asks for a duplicate home to be built. Turns out, the first home was completely filled with garbage. Multi-million-dollar home, just full of random, worthless trash, like someone would have on that old show, Hoarders. Didn't want the old home cleared out or anything, just another home to fill with junk. Story 29. For the most part, arrogance and total pieces of crap. I'm not saying all of them are, cause they're definitely not, but goddamn man, I hated doing security work for these type of people. A lot think they can do and say whatever they want with absolutely no consequences. It's funny because the property I did security at required me to tell them no, and damn did they hate that. I had a very intoxicated woman who was some type of Hispanic/Latino call me the N-word non-stop while I escorted her drunk self back to her room. Mind you, I'm a Hispanic male myself. Few of them are very racist, especially once they start drinking. They think because I'm not black, even though I'm still a minority, that I wouldn't care about them saying the N-word or referring to others as the N-word. It came to a point where I dropped the Hospitality Act and had to tell the people to shut your effing mouth. There are definitely those who are awesome individuals, though. They ask for a section in the lounge to be saved for them, so me being security, I go ahead and set it up for them, and they tip me $100 to $200. I've seen a lot of prostitution among the super rich as well, though, so they're definitely a part of the problem in the sense of human trafficking, not to mention the amount of drugs circulating also. A lot of the super rich blew my mind on how some weren't business owners, lawyers, or doctors, ended up being in some sort of illegal work. We had a whole sting operation where I worked that brought down an a-hole that pushed a lot of drugs and a lot of prostitution. I've seen the owner, who's a billionaire, turn a blind eye to certain things to an extent because the super rich people coming to this property spent a lot of money. So basically, keep the big whale coming. I've also seen a very wealthy Venezuelan family have their daughter marrying a very wealthy Russian family's son. Both were owners of oil or something, and damn was that wedding gorgeous. Very respectable families on both sides, and they took care of us, providing the security services for them and everyone. A lot of them seem to be into all kinds of fetishes and whatnot also. Like, I'm talking about a dude who had 4 other women, sex workers, urinate on him, and then vice versa. The room was a mess, lol. Edit. Super rich celebrities were cool, I guess, too. I had the opportunity to meet Nipsey Hussle a few weeks before he was murdered. Drake is definitely an interesting individual. I did security work for him when he was doing his Scorpion tour, and him and his crew had an after party till about 7 a.m. I clicked into work that day at 2 p.m. the day prior, lol. Story 30. I can finally contribute. My step-grandpa is a plumber and had to frequently go to a very well-known billionaire's ranch. He has many stories about the guy. Here are a few. Absolutely addicted to Candy Crush and Angry Birds. Once asked my step-grandpa if he could help him beat a level of Angry Birds, to which my step-grandpa responded, "What the F is Angry Birds?" Effed with my step-grandpa's apprentice when they first met by constantly going up to him to shake his hand after running it under a cold faucet. The billionaire thought that was peak comedy and cried laughing about it the next day. After watching Mr. Deeds, my step-grandpa was convinced that the Hawaiian Punch scene was based on the billionaire because he was a Hawaiian Punch friend. Was bummed when nobody visited his house for trick-or-treating the night before. His whole ranch is gated and the front gate is 3 miles from the house. His wife made him throw away his bowling ball that had a replica of his head in it. He was extremely proud of that bowling ball and didn't understand why it bothered his wife. There are so many other stories, but those are my favorite. Everyone says eat the rich, but if they do, I hope they spare him because he seems like a top-notch guy. He's old as F now and probably won't make it much further in life. I hope I can meet him one day. Story 31. I straight up saw Jeffrey Epstein hop off one of his private jets with a very young Scandinavian girl. I also knew someone else he exploited years before I ever even knew who he was. The dude had a queen-sized bed to the right of the entrance to his jet, by the way. I've also seen millionaire doctors who have one car for every day of the year, just about. I've met billionaires who are very modest in their appearance and demeanor and still tip reasonably. I've regularly received $100 tips while at these old jobs, though. $20 was the typical tip per employee. There's also a subset of very wealthy people that are very distinctly sociopathic and insistent, to the point where they've been very verbally abusive, but in a scarier way than your typical angry customer. It's like this switch gets flipped and their personality shifts in a split second. Totally fake people and definitely capable of emotionally ripping people to shreds. I've seen a lot, but this is what I can recall as of now. Honestly, I kind of wish I could put some of those experiences behind me and never look back. Story 32. I worked for a catering company that was owned by a man who's in this club. They call themselves a Christian fraternity, but they're very much a cult. Nobody will convince me otherwise. One night a week, they would meet at their clubhouse, which also happened to be the company's primary venue. We had 2. Together, the men of this club owned about half of the city. During these meetings, because it was all supposed to be top secret, they only had one wait staff person on, who they called the butler, and that person was me. They served their own drinks from the bar, and I would make a bunch of appetizers for them to snack on for their meetings, and then I'd clean and leave before they were fully done. One night, I had to get some extra chairs, so I texted the lead butler to ask where they were. He told me the closet behind the stage. I didn't know there were closets behind the stage. I found out that night that there were 2 closets behind the stage. I went to the wrong one first, with nothing but my flashlight to light the way. There were some chairs there, but they were like ottomans and I needed chivalry. But I noticed that there was more to that closet, like little steps, and then it kind of turned. So I thought maybe the chairs were in there. I went up and into this tiny room, and there was a effing, I crap you not, altar. Not like a, yay, let's take communion for fun altar. No judgment if that's your thing. It was this small table with a marble basin, some unlit candles, a knife, and a skull. Next to it on a shelf was an old-looking book. Did not look like any Bible I've seen, more like a really thick journal. Immediately, I got out of there and texted my sister about where I was, what I'd seen, told her I would message her every few hours with an inside joke of ours so she knows it was me. I was convinced I was about to get sacrificed. I got the chair and brought it out, went back to cooking, kept a knife in my apron. Nothing happened that particular night with that, but I did accidentally walk in on their meeting after it started, about a month later, where they were chanting and then immediately paused to stare at me until I left. Then my boss, the company owner, followed me to the kitchen. I was so sure I was about to have my throat slit. He asked me to tell him what I'd seen. I said nothing. Asked what I heard. I said, "You were singing? Is this a glee club?" Just playfully playing the village idiot. He left me alone, but after that I was taken off that shift. Story 33. One of the most beautiful people I've ever met is extremely wealthy. I taught ceramics at a studio in Santa Monica for 11 years as my second job. She came there to make clay pieces. We admired each other's work and began chatting. She dressed very simply and worked very hard. She was kind to everyone. Her pieces were beautiful beyond words. One time I asked if she would show me how she made bowls. She met me one morning and spent a couple hours showing me a lot of really important aspects to the whole process of making a functional bowl. She told me she was having a Christmas party and gave me an invitation that had been photocopied on a plain sheet of white paper. A small map, but no decoration. I put it away, but decided I'd go because she was so nice. On the day of the party, I dressed and went over the map. I knew a couple of streets, and it looked like a straight run out Sunset Boulevard. What I didn't understand was that it went so far down Sunset that I was driving in a very hilly area, and the houses started getting bigger and bigger and bigger and further apart, and the addresses were almost impossible to notice. Luckily, the map was really accurate, and even though the engine of my car was struggling, I finally made it. I was so nervous about driving up such a steep incline and the possibility of being arrested, African American, I had to sit in my car and compose myself and dry off. My heart was beating like a herd of stampeding buffalo. When I buzzed to enter, she ran up to me and hugged me and told me she was so glad I came. Even though the house was the most beautiful home I'd ever been inside, it was not full of unnecessary crap. She and her husband treasured art and books. I was born in a working poor family and had been indoctrinated to believe a lot of bullcrap about all rich people, all American Europeans, just as I'm sure many of them are indoctrinated to believe the worst of all this or all that. This woman changed my heart and mind without really trying. Yeah, this just goes to show you that racism and hatred is taught. It is not learned through life experiences. Just saying. Story 34. Not exactly cater, but I felt the need to share. My brother married into a multi-billion old money family. The family celebrates its own holidays, usually the birthdays or death days of past family patriarchs. For one such occasion, my brother invited me to come along as a glorified nanny for my nephew and niece. I decided to join. Here's a list of the weirder things. While they had an army of chefs and other staff on payroll, when it was time for the holiday dinner, the serving was to be done by the youngest generation, and everyone had to pretend that grandma had cooked everything herself by hand, even though everyone knew that everything had been prepared by the chefs. Everyone wore old clothes, not in terms of style, but their actual old clothes, wearing the same sweaters they wore as teens or young adults. My brother got to borrow one of his father-in-law's old sweaters. I was more dressed up, which meant I very much looked like the help. They had a small ceremony where everyone took turns in getting down on their knees in front of the patriarch and matriarch, who then gifted them some small heirloom or other trinket and told them the story behind it. Story 35. I do, and can't say due to NDAs and ongoing business, which I know is such an annoying tease. I have so many stories I'd love to tell, but don't trust the anonymity of Reddit due to the reach of specific people I work for. Here's a completely generic example that won't give anything away. I'm on the design team working on a billionaire's main residence. We work for a shell company a level below the family office. Usually they schedule our site events when the client's out of town, and they're always referred to as the client, never by name. But occasionally we have to review something when the owner is on property. In those instances, if the client ends up traveling either into or out of the property, everything halts before their caravan of high-end SUVs passes through. All the help is ushered into hidden holding areas, and the help includes all of the white collar workers too, not just the gardeners. Other than the immediate top-level house staff, they never see anyone working on their property. It's always pristine and empty, even though there are tens to hundreds of people on site at any given time. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Really a nothing burger compared to the actual projects being designed and built. Story 36. I don't know about cater, but one of my companies deals with gems, particularly investment-grade ones. I have a lot of super rich clientele, but my scope is fairly narrow to gems, and I guess watches. People send millions of dollars on natural fancy-colored diamonds, and hundreds of thousands on colored gems like sapphire, ruby, emerald, Paraiba. The higher-end gems are investments, although they tend to buy them in jewelry form so they can be showcased via wearing. $100,000 watches are fairly normal. Paytech, RM, J&Co, etc. In terms of outside of direct business, I do hang out with them, and it's mostly just overpriced things for the sake of being able to afford it. Expensive real estate is one thing, since you at least keep it as an asset, but spending tens of thousands on a bottle of wine is another. People gamble more in a weekend in Vegas or Macau than entire families will make in several generations. There are a lot of things the super rich buy that you don't think are expensive but actually are. In fact, they tend to try and hide the logos. Take Zuckerberg. His simple gray shirts are around $400. There are suits like the Chiton K50 that cost $50K to $100K. Then you've got people who spend $36 million on a cup. This same person spent around $170 million on a painting on his Amex Centurion, and around $80 million on 2 diamonds, and another $180 million on a Manhattan penthouse, all within like 5 months. Funny how his net worth on paper is only $1 billion, yet he manages to spend half of that on few toys in a few months. Goes to show you how silly Forbes' list is. Hell, the fact that V. Putin isn't even on the list of billionaires is proof enough of how ridiculously inaccurate it is. Bartenders, waiters, and small business owners are able to hide half their cash from the IRS. And you don't think the elite can? Story 37. Through past work, I met a guy who asked would I be interested in some extra bar work occasionally at his house. I said absolutely, happy for the extra cash and change of scenery. So for the next about 4 years, I would turn up at about 8, a few tools of the trade I favored with me, and head through the beautifully disguised secret door, down to what amounted to a self-contained underground house with a fully stocked bar, ice machine, etc., where I would make cocktails for the participants of these periodic special parties. From 9 or so couples, some in little masks for disguise, not COVID masks, and little else, would arrive and mingle and then vanish and reappear, with a different thirst to quench. Not quite 5 hours I worked. It was hardly even work. It was an insight into a world I would never know. He came over, fully dressed, before 1 a.m., said thanks, and gave me an envelope. Cash is king, he said. I think you recognized X and X. They would appreciate if events here remain here. I said I didn't see a thing, like I was in some crappy gangster movie. My 5 hours work made me more than I make in a week. Next day, I get a call asking can I come over, just for a few minutes. I'm off, so I head over that afternoon. He greets me at the door, brings me into the hall, and says, the guests wanted you to have this, and hope we'll be seeing you again. It was another envelope, the same amount. I can't believe it. Every few months for the next 4 years, this was repeated, until I couldn't do it anymore. I can't describe why, but I would dread the call. I think being part of something that was so throwaway to them while I'm living off a bag of change at times then was just depressing. I'm not a wordsmith. I can't capture the emotion here. Sorry for so many words. Story 38. I've worked as a bartender for the last almost decade. Got offered some gigs as a private bartender through coworkers for some catering company. Turns out that catering company's owner was married to a major tech company's exec who had C-level friends. Bartended Christmas, New Year's, and 4th of July parties at their mansion, and holy smokes. Yacht parades, seemingly endless bottles of high-priced wines, like hundreds of dollars per bottle, just popped willy-nilly. Worked for a wine bar where that's been my specialty, and other extravagances. I was studying mechanical engineering at the time and was told some higher up in the software engineering side was at one of the parties and was stunned. They introduced me and I absolutely blew it. Said getting where they were was incredible and I hope to do the same someday or something as pathetic. I guess the level of waste and ignorance is what really stuck with me though. Yeah, I got paid and the events were fun, but seeing all the food thrown away, the need to show off for seemingly no reason to other millionaires / potential billionaires, and generally not caring about anything other than the tastes of the other people at the parties seemed weird. Being in the struggling position, hearing the problems of the super rich is weird. Story 39. One of my dad's best friends made hundreds of millions buying and selling oil refineries in the 1980s/90s. In his 60s, he decided that he'd accomplished his professional mission and let his freak flag fly. He's the friendliest, goofiest, and most down-to-earth person you'll ever meet. He drives around in a bustled-looking but fully functional car from the 1930s. He hand-painted a folksy-looking American flag on the driver's side door and loves it when people wave at him while he drives by. He submitted his very first painting, made while he was in his 60s, to a local art competition. He won first prize, and for the next month, he walked around with art catalogs stuffed in his jacket pocket, handing them out to anyone who'd listen, because his painting was on the cover. He now collects antiques, but not fancy/expensive antiques. He loves fun and colorful American folk art from the first half of the 20th century and fills his home with it. He spends his days driving around the county and dropping in on his friends to tell them the latest dad joke he heard. He's my kind of hero. Story 40. I used to work as a bathroom attendant for a very expensive bathroom. My bathroom had a $500 cover charge plus additional wiping and washing fees, of course. A demanding job to say the least, but it was a very good work experience and I was lucky enough to see and hear some of the best poopers in the world. It's remarkable what a true professional is able to squeeze out with hardly any effort. These men were like world-class clowns shaping their various balloons into all sorts of fantastic creatures and eerily detailed caricatures, only their medium, of course, was high-quality feces. Some would take hours painstakingly crafting their sculptures with merely their dexterous finster and agile legwork. The smells they could waft into my waiting nose made me feel like a hungry patron at a Michelin 3-star restaurant as the chef plays with wild and exotic flavors and combinations never seen before. It was truly unbelievable to try and sniff through the layers of stink that had so carefully been woven together. I'd close my eyes and try to solve the poopiful puzzle laid before my olfactory, but alas, my senses were never keen enough to hang with the likes of these experts. Even with veteran attendants explaining to me in painstakingly detail the perfumist craftsmanship to each stench composition, I never quite developed the nose for it. Not to say I didn't appreciate it. Those stanks were among the stinkiest I've ever stunked in. Farting seems so crude, a word for what men of their stature and prestige were able to perform. Imagine the horn section of an orchestra comprised of the greatest and most talented hornsmen of the last millennia playing a symphony so sweet and so moving that the audience weeps, for they have not heard anything the likes of this before, and they're already sad as they realize this moment is finite, and their deflowered ears will never hear such a divine exquisiteness again. The ballad of the anus danced in my head with each customer, and they all play their own haunting and unique melodies. Their wiping techniques were unparalleled, as was the extraordinarily high-quality toilet paper we provided. For most, all it took was one tight wad of plush paper and graceful flick of the wrist to remove any excess feces that might have still clung to their rectums. As much of a thrill as it was for me to watch such consummate professionals work their wiping magic, more often than not, they let our state-of-the-art bidets do what they were engineered for. I was never allowed to use them. That may be needless to say, but imagine it must have felt like a dedicated team of maids and washmen set upon to clean every single nook and crevice. No stray particle would be left unloosed, and I want to believe none ever did. My job, of course, was not to listen, smell, and appreciate what marvelous poopers I stood before, but to attend to their needs post-defecation. I was always careful not to make eye contact, because someone as lowly as I could not be so bold as to presume I may look upon the face of those so brilliant. As soon as the stall door swung open on its golden hinges, I was there with soap and perfumes ready, pre-scrubbing and scenting as they made their way to the washing basin. The water, I trained for months before I could draw it, had to be the perfect temperature lest we lose our prestigious customer base. I would wash their hands completely, scrubbing their nails and massaging each finger and joint. Then I would proceed to massage their shoulders and work my way down their back to their glorious buttocks. Sometimes they'd greet my deep tissue gluten eating with a friendly fart, a thank you, if you will. Then my work would be complete, and I'd offer a variety of the finest mints and mouthwashes so that they may continue their day at top form. They would never tip, not a single one, but the job experience alone made it all worthwhile. Story 41. I was, and still am, friends with the CEO of my last employer, which I joined at 24 when we had about 40 employees. Well, those 40 employees are now something like 5,000 around the world, and he sold the business, while remaining CEO, for a reported 200 million euros. He was and still is one of the kindest guys I know. Still replies to texts and came to my leaving drinks. The only time I saw him do anything ridiculous was when me and a workmate turned up to the pub to find him already there. His eyes lit up as he waved the company credit card, yelled, "It's tax deductible, boys," and bought us some of the finest whiskeys in the place. Due to being a weird guy, I always approach everyone as a friend, and that's how I always treated him. At my leaving drinks, he asked me why I didn't come to him directly when another business offered me more. My boss's boss was an elitist prick, and that was my answer. We're friends. It didn't cross my mind once. I last texted him about 9 months ago to congratulate him on the company's success. He texted me straight back. The next day, he was on the cover of a major industry magazine. Sometimes the craziest thing a wealthy person can do is surprise you by staying true to themselves. Story 42. My family has owned a pest control business for over 40 years. I've worked in the business on and off for a number of years. I have lots of stories of rich folks being rich folks, but one thing that will always stick with me was the time I was servicing a longtime customer's home, and I was there for the third time that summer. On that visit, I commented on the owner's house and just remarked something like I loved their paintings in their dining room. All original pieces of art from very acclaimed artists. All these paintings were one of a kind and absolutely huge. The homeowner told me that they didn't like the look of the room anymore and had been looking to get rid of the paintings, but couldn't find a buyer. I jokingly asked, "How much for that one?" knowing damn well it was a very expensive piece. His reply, "Oh, I can't really remember. I bought it about 30 years ago. I think it cost me about $25,000. "Oh geez, that ain't cheap," I replied. "Actually, it's one of the less expensive ones I'm willing to take a loss on. Do you want it?" Thinking he was asking if I was interested in purchasing, I said something to the effect of, "Thanks, but there's no way I could afford it." He said, No, I want that thing out of here. Do you want it?" He wanted to give me a $25,000 painting just because he wanted it out, because he was bored with it. I was a little younger at the time, and to be honest, this thing was so freaking huge, I couldn't even fathom what to do with it / how to sell it, etc. So I turned it down because I was kinda caught off guard. Years later, we still service the house, but the owners have deceased and that painting is gone. Had my current self gotten that offer, I would have figured out a way to get that thing out and sell it. Still makes me sad that I was so dumb. Yeah, this is a massive missed opportunity. I know you were young, but there's no excuse, man. You take that thing, you sell that bad boy. Even for half of what it's worth, you could flip 12 grand on a picture? Come on. Story 43. I worked for two completely different types of rich. One was about my age, back then early 30s, who got filthy rich with real estate, building apartment complexes and selling them. We initially met because we were doing the roofing for a mansion he built for himself and his then girlfriend in a rather wealthy neighborhood. After the building was finished, a few months later, she decided that the pool wasn't big enough, so he bought the neighbor's house to his left, hired an architect and a construction company, tore down the house that was standing there, and built her a huge pool area to her liking. A few months after everything was finished, they broke up. A few weeks later, he had a new girlfriend. She didn't like the pool area, so he bought the neighbor's house to the right, hired an architect and a company, tore the house down, and built her a pool area to her liking, while refurbishing the one he already had so he could meet his buddies there, having a drink and a barbecue while watching some football games. Guess what? He broke up with this girlfriend even before the new pool area was done. Around comes girlfriend number 3. They stay together. Everything is fine. They even marry, and she gets pregnant with his first child. Turns out she's an overprotective mom that doesn't want any hazards for their kids in their home. So he had to tear down the pools and turn them into a garden / playground. This happened all over the course of 3 years and cost more than I'm going to make in my lifetime. The other one was an older gentleman, maybe late 60s, early 70s. He lived in a bog-standard row house in a working-class neighborhood and hired us to repair some roof tiles after a hailstorm in the area. Nothing, really nothing, screamed money about him. He rather looked like a retired high school janitor. After we were done and ready to leave, he gave us a €5 tip and asked whether I could come the next day to inspect some of his other buildings and give him a price for the repairs. Since it involved a lot of driving, he picked me up at my office in a 20-year-old Volkswagen Golf. The kind of car you'd buy your kid as their first car, because they're rather inexpensive but kind of reliable. He drove me from one building to the next. Malls, office buildings, supermarkets, apartment buildings, and stuff. Turns out, back in the day, he was a rather successful engineer holding several patients that are still making him big money from big corps. He was bored in his retirement, so he started buying / building and renting out real estate. As a hobby, his kids all went to university without him paying a single dime for them. They had to work while studying and are now well off on their own. He told me he doesn't need any luxury or cares much about having money, but he enjoys making it, and donates what he doesn't spend every year. Needless to say, he is to this day one of our best customers. By now, he isn't even asking for an offer, he just orders. And he still drives his old VW Golf and still wears the same worn-out clothes. I even doubt he actually owns a suit, since he's wearing the same shabby clothes to his topping out ceremonies, even when there are VP's guests present. Story 44. Many moons ago, I had a summer job carrying a clipboard and going door to door asking people to support an environmental group with donations. The rich homes were the worst, who often wouldn't give you anything, but you had to walk extra far across their property to reach their huge mansion homes. At one house, the crazy rich Asian lady was very sour, wouldn't listen for a second and just told me to go away. So I've trekked up to their long-ass driveway, only to be turned away like a beggar, and as she shut the door, I hear her snapping instructions at someone else inside. I'm not a quarter of the way down the drive, and the massive ornate brass gates start whirring and closing, while I'm still inside the property. Now, if I ran for it, I may have made it through the gates before they closed, but nah. If this was what she wanted, I stopped and watched the gates shut with a clang. Pause, then about-faced and headed back up to the mansion, which I guess was going to be my new home now. Next, I heard the whirring noise again of the gates opening up. Can't make up their minds, these people, so I leisurely strolled out. Story 45. I feel like I was trained for this question, so I hope this comment gets interaction. Firstly, I knew a tenant who would put the lint from the dryer into the laundry room sink and run the water on it as if to flush it down the drain. Guess who had to clean that up every single time he did it? Secondly, when people throw out garbage, but more specifically empty boxes in our basement, there are two types of tenants. There are those who cut them up and fold them to either be tied and put out to the alleyway by me, or just put in a bag. I love those people. Then there are those who will just toss the entire box, basically how it was, right after they opened it, next to the garbage cans in our basement and leave from there. Well, yeah, it is my job to just take those and throw them away. It's really effing annoying to be cutting up these huge boxes. Like, I'm taking sofa-sized boxes and throwing them away when they're still filled with styrofoam and a bunch of extra crap that came with the package, which gets on the floor and means I then need to clean the floor. A little effort to throw that stuff out beforehand would go a long way. Thirdly, when people get packages delivered to my building, they're always surprised when I give it to them. Like, they'll be walking in the front door and I'll say, "Hey X, there's a box there for you. Let me go get it." And they'll be genuinely surprised as if they weren't expecting anything. Now, this wouldn't be odd if it happened every now and then, because I get it, surprise packages come in. But it happens so often that I think they order so much stuff online that they don't even keep track of what's coming in. Because I know for me, when I order stuff, I'm basically tracking that crap daily until it gets here. So the thought of ordering something and being oblivious to the fact that there was something coming in that day makes zero sense. Story 46. Does dating count as having to cater to someone? It sure felt like he thought I was more of a slave than a partner. I dated this super rich guy for 3 months this summer. Worst idea ever. And boy, did I learn some bizarre crap about how they live. Like, apparently, after he'd get wasted and do too much coke at horse races, who goes to horse races? He'd have a nurse come over the next day and give him a saline IV for his hangovers, instead of just drinking Gatorade and taking Tylenol like a normal person. I know that the service cost several $100s, but he didn't tell me how much exactly. He was in his late 20s and his mom still bought all of his clothes for him. I don't think he'd ever lived without a maid cleaning up after him. He dropped a glass in his room and broke it and didn't clean it up for 2 months because he legit didn't know how to clean anything. He didn't do his laundry for 6 months. He had that many clothes. And then I had to help him pile like 10 garbage bags full of clothes into the back of his car and take them to the laundromat, show him how to operate the washers, etc., then force him to put them away so they didn't just sit in a pile, taking up literally half his room. The pile was bigger than his bed. He was so sensitive to any sort of discomfort that he would act like he was going to have a panic attack if he was required to have a direct conversation about any sort of conflict, even minor issues like calling the internet company about an outage. Sometimes I had to order for him at restaurants if it was something more exotic than steaks and hamburgers. He'd just make this pleading, panicked face at me. He was so used to having things done for him, he didn't even know how to ask for help, and he never thanked anyone. It was expected. He literally didn't know basic crap about life, like how to apply for an apartment. I had to help him, and he didn't realize you had to ask questions like, is the water included in rent? He didn't even know what was a realistic amount of money to pay for rent. He ended up drunkenly essaying me and then ghosting me. And when I ran into him 2 months later and was like, "What the F, dude?" He said he's not required to acknowledge someone who's spoken to him in an angry tone. And his text to me sounded more like a PR release than the way you'd speak to someone you dated. I'm 99% sure he paid somebody with legal background to help him write them. He told me he had done that before in another incident when he got in trouble for something in high school. He didn't tell me what it was he got in trouble for. I wish I could hire a PR agent every time I did something stupid while I was drunk. I didn't even want to out him or report him to the cops or anything. I just wanted him to apologize and acknowledge that maybe he needed to stop being so effed up on Addies and booze all the time, because that's how this kind of crap happens. He said I was being unreasonable and it's not his fault because he, quote, didn't experience it that way. He called it a mental health boundary to ghost me after he assaulted me because he couldn't handle the stress of being held accountable for his actions. I think I might have actually been the first person who ever told him to his face that he did something wrong. His attitude was just, well, it happened. I don't know what you expect me to do now. Generally, that was how he acted whenever he upset someone or made a mistake. He thought that his family was middle class because they didn't own multiple yachts like his neighbors, and would argue with normal people about that being unfair. Like, his family had a big-ass house out in the country and multiple vacation properties, but he needed us to know how hard it was for his dad to not be Jeff Bezos. We had a really embarrassing, for him, conversation where I had to make him look up the median income for the United States, at which point he realized his family was in like the top 3% of incomes in the country. He moved into this warehouse I live at. That's how we met, pretending to be broke. He kept a second 2-bedroom apartment in a really nice neighborhood that was like $2,000 a month, because he knew people wouldn't like him if they knew he had a rich family and he, quote, wanted the life experience. He was basically LARPing as a poor person so he could feel like he understood how real life works. I didn't know until 2 months into dating him how well off his family actually was. He hid it, and he would go on rants about how it's actually way harder to be a rich kid because your parents will be upset if you date poor people. He wanted to hide me from all his rich friends and his family because he thought they would disinherit him for dating me. He had one of those expensive $500 an hour psychs that would tell him what he wanted to hear and prescribe him anything he asked for. He was frequently strung out on Adderall. I mean, like, he was being prescribed 3 times what anybody who actually needs it as prescribed. His psych was clearly just pay for play. It would have been way cheaper to just do meth. He also armchair diagnosed himself and all his rich friends with autism, so he could claim that all their sociopathic behavior was because they had mental illness, and therefore nobody could be upset at them for acting the way they did. Generally speaking, for him and his rich guy friends, mental health was an excuse to act how they wanted. For everyone else, any sort of mental health issues meant that we were insane and not to be taken seriously, no matter what we said. He insisted that his life was the worst because he didn't have to do anything to survive, and he could just drift through life. His existence was meaningless, and therefore he had it way harder than everybody else. He'd often cry about it to all of us. Mind you, this was during the pandemic, when most of us had just been fired, and people in my building were being evicted for missing rent. Like, this guy had really convinced himself he was a victim of society, and it was our responsibility to let him act however he wanted because it was so hard for him. What a piece of work. Crap gives me such a headache, I'm going to need to call my personal assistant to come over here and give me an IV drip about it. Story 47. Worked for a catering company for years. 2 things come to mind. First was a bat mitzvah party thrown for their 13-year-old daughter. They had a zipline set up from one end of our 4-story, 70-feet wide ballroom to the other. She made her entrance on the zipline, and then all the kids got to play with it for a while. You know, like setting up a slide, but better. The theme of the party was like the Grammys, so they had celebrity impersonators there wandering around entertaining the kids. At the end of the night, the girl got a Grammy for Best Daughter, some crap like that. A real one. The parents paid the people who make the actual Grammy trophies to make one for their daughter. That was my benchmark for rich for a long time. Then this hedge fund that I'm fairly sure I'm still not allowed to name threw a party because they had a good year screwing people over in the world of finance or something. They had Maroon 5 play. The band, live. The actual effing band played their party. They had laser light shows playing on our marble ceilings. Then, after Maroon 5 was done, there was a bit of an after party with this lit DJ performing in like the middle of a giant flat screen. It was impressive, man. I think I'm underselling it. Story 48. I used to do residential electrical, mostly multi-million-dollar plus homes. Can confirm, money can buy pretty much anything except good taste and common sense. Rich people will spend stupid amounts of money on pets, especially. On one home, we installed several Decora-style switches, the flat ones that you press top or bottom, about a foot off the floor in several spots throughout the home, so the precious doggo could turn lights on with their nose in the middle of the night because they were afraid of the dark. She also paid through the nose for us to move, remove, or add those switches several times during the build. Another lady got a dog ceiling fan. Supposedly someplace took her, likely heavily sedated, mongrel, and used lasers to create a 3D model of the wretched thing. Then cast the mini mongrel replicas in gold-covered bronze. Those were then stuck to a gold-plated ceiling fan with exotic wood blades and designer glass for the lamps. It remains the ugliest and most difficult to install ceiling fan I've ever encountered. Another family got a company that normally builds specialty food service appliances to design a water dispenser for Fido. Motion activated so it would fill automatically, then dump the used water after delay and sterilize with UV light. Bottled water delivered twice a week. We had a dedicated outlet with its own circuit just to power the thing. Lots of crazy rich ladies love their pets. Story 49. I'm a realtor in Seattle, was helping a student of UW that was from Japan find a condo for in the area. Nice kid, good English, believe he was in the medical field. One of the times I met with him, I accidentally handed him the wrong folder, which contents were for a very wealthy Facebook executive, which had about 4 to 5 different houses, all at least $3 million. He opens the folder and says he wants to check one of the properties out. In my experience, he's wasting our time, as he was only looking for about $800K. He's a nice kid, and it's not far away, so I agree and we check it out. The minute we step in the backyard that's overlooking Lake Washington, he says, "How much do we need to offer to get this in contract today?" I'm in shock, as I assumed his dad was just buying him a condo to live in while over here for college. I ask him how he would finance it, and he says, "Give me a minute." Comes back 5 minutes later and shows me an email from his father with a screenshot of his bank account. This was an entire list of bank accounts, maybe 15 to 20, with the account number crossed out. The lowest amount of money he had in one of his accounts was $9 million. Needless to say, we bought the house, and a few weeks later, he calls me and says he needs some help. Can you come over? Which is an odd request, but this kid just brought in about 20% of my yearly profit, so I have to go. I walk in the house, and he has a couple of his neighbors in the house. The kid greets me and says, "We've all come to an agreement of terms for the sale of my neighbors' homes." All the neighbors smile and say, "All we need you to do is write up the contracts and we'll give you a 1% commission for each house, just for writing up the contract." Of course, I agreed and brought out my laptop and started gathering info that they had previously agreed upon. The neighbor on the left of the house he previously bought had agreed to sell his home for $3.6 million, and the neighbor on the right had agreed on $4.9 million. He had just completely remodeled his entire home. I write up the contracts and we send it over to escrow and go about our business. I later asked him why he was buying from them, and he said the remodeled house was for his parents to visit, and the other house on the left is for family to come visit. They had just spent $11 million in 1 month just for a place to stay a week or two a year. I still help him buy 2 to 3 properties a year where they just buy in cash and don't do anything with it, and just let it sit. Obviously frustrating with the housing crisis, but I know where my bread's buttered. Story 50. Met a guy in college, UK, that was wealthy. I don't know exactly how wealthy, but he was able to fly to NYC and go to CBGB's to see one of his favorite bands just for the weekend. More on that in a minute. But he was super nice. In hindsight, very shy and awkward, but cool, you know? I was in a very rough place life-wise, and he used to sneak me some money so I could get lunch. Like, no big deal. Just go into town and get some food, mate, and grab me something while you're there. That kind of thing. Gave me some money for groceries a couple times because my cupboards were bare. Got the drinks in a couple times. It meant a lot because he just did it out of kindness. We used to kick about a little, not like super close friends, but he was just a nice guy to everyone. So yeah, we were talking about this NYC trip. Kinda surreal when you realize it's thousands of miles, jet lag, very tight schedule, and a serious chunk of cash to see a band, but hey, why not, right? If you can do it, why wouldn't you? So it's Thursday at finishing time, and I'm like, have a good time, man. Safe travels, and I'll see you Monday. And off he goes to the airport, and I go to work my night shift for minimum wage. Monday rolls around, and he's in the communal space looking fried and talking about the weekend. A whole bunch of us are just hanging out. Just before the next class, he comes over and is like, "Hey man, how was your weekend?" "Oh, I got you a little gift." I was floored. Despite it being a really busy and no doubt important time for him, he got me something. He reaches in his bag and pulls out a super limited edition release of my favorite band that hadn't come out in the UK yet, and this particular format was going to be very hard to come by, and expensive. He just said, "Yeah, I was in Tower Records and saw it and figured you'd like it. Oh, and I got one for your girlfriend too," and hands me another. Then is like, "Gotta go to class. See you later." Never tried to buy anyone's friendship. Was just a really nice guy that seemed to pay attention to the people around him. Story 51. A lot of these comments are crapping on the super rich, which is cool. Eat the greedy rich. But I work at the state's main brunch for a bank that only covers a few states. So basically, I deal with the high-profile customers in the area who have officers on their accounts and deal with investment services and have HELOCs I can't even fathom servicing. Maybe it's because I have direct access to their trusts and loans and MM accounts, but 75% of them are the nicest and most considerate customers I deal with. They have their IDs ready, account numbers written on laminated paper for me, correctly spelled payee, cashier, check notes. Wires that never get sent back. Those 75% participate in every charity in my now booming area. A client of ours took me into his freaking helicopter, and I can only service basic needs at the bank. Another knew I loved golfing and took me to a private celebrity golf tournament where all the buy-ins were donated to an MS foundation. It was a legitimate joy working with individual/corporate millionaires who are from the community you work in. Most just want their dream home on the lake/ocean/hillside and for their grandkids to never struggle. Even before this job, when I was a bartender at a seaside tourist bar, I had a patron who would tip me $100 minimum. Like one beer, he would just hand me a $100 bill. He lived in this vacation town community and just wanted the bartender's company. He was too drunk to drive one night, so I drove him home in his car and called the other bartender to come pick me up. This mother effer threw a strap of tens into the passenger window of my coworker's car while we were driving away because he knew I wouldn't accept it if he just tried to hand it to me. But miserable people are just miserable people. Those 25% of millionaires who come in thinking they're keeping my bank afloat are insane, refusing to deal with me because I'm fairly new, demanding fees to be waived because they have so much money with us, dropping their deposits in a completely disrespectful order. I'm talking no tally deposit slip and checks facing every direction, then getting mad when their deposit isn't done in a minute, verbally assaulting staff because they staple their receipt onto their duplicate deposit slip in a way they don't like, verbally assaulting staff because we don't keep $100K in the branch on a Saturday, sexually harassing female coworkers. But honestly, we get treated like dirt more often by the broke as F customers than by the super rich. It's just more politically poignant to talk about the douchebag worth $3 million telling my coworker she should quit and live on his yacht than it is to talk about the convicted predator worth $300 asking when I want to go bowling, and rightfully so. Story 52. One of my first jobs as a professional building interior detailing technician. Our company had one client who paid quite a bit to have one of his houses cleaned every Wednesday night and every Sunday night, whether he was actually using it that week or not. So many of the details of that job are seared into my brain now. We were required to wear all white slacks, white polos, white shoes, white gloves, white belts. New gloves every week. New, not just clean. We had to change into the shoes when we arrived, and we could not wear them outside. There were usually 6 of us, and we each had a specific task. My job was vacuuming. Everything had to be vacuumed twice. Once when we arrived, and again after all the dusting and linens had been taken care of. He demanded a very specific vacuum pattern on the second pass so that no lines were visible in any of the carpets afterwards. Vacuums were not to be emptied indoors, which meant changing shoes constantly. After a couple visits, we ended up just stationing an extra person outside to do nothing but pass us equipment, empty trash and vacuum canisters, etc. All linens in the house were white and were changed twice per week. A separate company handled laundering them. They were all ironed/pressed prior to delivery, and we were responsible for steaming any wrinkles out of them before we put them on the beds. And just in case you're going to say, well, if he isn't there, just cut corners. If he wasn't present, he had 2 observers who were. I think they were personal assistants. They always had digital cameras with them and would document every single room upon completion. They were friendly, as was the client, and it paid well. In 1999, I was making $14 an hour base, plus an additional $26 an hour for that specific job, and every single one of us got Christmas and birthday gifts from him. Yes, it was all crazy, but we were treated very well. Story 53. Worked for custom builders that cater to rich one. Had a wave surf pool in backyard with a regular pool and hot tub with a little rock feature. They wanted us to build a sliding pool house over the top of all 3, and one of the walls would slide over the rock feature on the hot tub. Anyways, that project was intense. It took like just a month setting rails, because it was essentially train tracks, but they had to be cast forged as continuous no breaks. And the whole thing, like 50-foot building, couldn't have been more than 1/16 an inch in variance, end to end, so you would shatter the glass panels. So we dig tracks with mounts for height brackets. Pour concrete. This takes like a week. But then we spend like a week laser, just ever so slightly adjusting each bracket to perfection. Weld it in place and double check everything. Finish the welds, then place on train tracks. Do the cast welding. Specialty guy came after that. Then grind laser, over and over again. Then fill tracks with concrete, up to bottom of train tracks, then clean and finish final double checks. But that guy always had a project. 5 years with that company, and there was always a crew at his place doing something. Changing one area, adding another. Sometimes it was weird stuff like that pool house we went and built a floor over the pool so they could have a wedding reception out there, then took it down later. But a lot of ridiculous stuff. Was rich guy money, poor guy taste. Like one place we worked on, guy ordered barnwood flooring of pure walnut. Couple hundred a square foot was like, why isn't this smooth? Anyways, so ground it down a ton so it was smooth like glass. Had less personality than $20 square foot flooring and cost a ton in labor. Like, we straight up murdered a floor grinder on that job. Walnut is very tough, and there was hundreds of hours of grinding. This was common more than once. Get expensive imported tile that's too rough for my kids. I don't know what you want. This is what you ordered. Replace it with some Home Depot special and they're happy. Story 54. A distant family member, something like my third cousin twice removed or some crazy thing like that, worked for an industrialist in the Midwest in the 70s/80s as a personal secretary for the man. Stories I've heard. The man wanted to go skiing. Bought brand new gear for self and family. Upon returning, asked family member if he wanted any or if any in his size, and to take it because, quote, we probably won't ski again till next year. They didn't just go to CO or the Rockies to ski. They went to Austria. Family member was doing some duties at man's home. Accidentally bumped and knocked down a vase. Found out, upon self-reporting, that it was a priceless Ming area vase or some crazy thing like that. Don't worry about it, it's not like you did it on purpose. Man wanted a nice car and tasked my family member with finding options. Rolls, Bugatti, Ferrari, things like that. Ended up on Rolls. Drove it for a total of 112 miles. Didn't care for it. The Beamer drives better. Can I give you the car? Yeah, he took it and is part of a collector's club, and the guy helped with taxes and transfer. Story 55. Was friends with a guy in high school who was the only son of a rich couple. They hated being away from him, so they bought a house right next to our school when he started going there, and one started building houses near all his potential college options. The same separation anxiety meant that he was never allowed to come on class trips and used to get really upset when we'd all come back with inside stories. So during my senior year, the parents negotiate with the school and pay for my entire class to be flown out to their estate in the hills so that he could finally be on a class trip. Every meal was catered by one of the dad's companies. They rented limos for us to be taken around the place for activities and booked out a hotel nearby for us to stay at. They stayed with the son at the estate mansion. They were some of the nicest people that I've ever met, but they obsessively dotted on this dude. Once, while we're having a conversation in his room, he mentions that he's thirsty in passing, and the next thing I hear is the mom, who's outside and might have been snooping, yelling out to their maid to get some water. Story 56. I worked for a rich family who owned a publicly traded company. The husband inherited the company from his father, and his wife worked as the company interior decorator. They were elderly and grooming their son to take over the business. Over the years, the wife enjoyed my company and would call on me to help her with moving paintings and furniture in, out and around the office. Another task I eventually started doing was helping her go through all of the lotto tickets she bought. She won many small prize payouts, and one day I found a ticket that paid her $3 million. She put the ticket in an envelope and called her driver up from the garage to deliver it to her personal accountant. After he left the room, I must have looked odd to her because she asked what was wrong. I explained holding that ticket briefly was the most money I'd ever held in my life. She picked up the phone and called her secretary to come in with the petty cash box. She reaches in and hands me a stack of hundreds wrapped in a small bundle worth $50K. She told me to take my wife and kids on a nice holiday or a cruise and that I deserve it. I used that money to pay off the remaining balance of the mortgage on my house. Story 57. I used to work for a college counseling/private tutoring company. About 2 months after I started, one of our top-paying clients came in one day to pay for her son's college counseling and tutoring, 3 or so months worth. Gives me her credit card and casually tells me to charge $200K while scrolling through her phone. When I tell you my hands were sweaty and shaking, oh boy. She also gave me a $300 tip for my troubles. I later found out that client and her son lived in, at the time, the most expensive mansion in a city that falls under either the top 5 or 10 richest cities in the US. Also turned out, her husband was the founder/CEO of a giant pharma company in China and sent his family to live here. That whole family was crazy rich Asians personified, but genuinely nice people. You never would have known they were loaded. Also found out, one of her rich friends from the same neighborhood was one of the many parents caught in the college admission scandal from a few years back. It was wild. Story 58. My family is close enough to a very wealthy family that we get invited on vacations with them, a couple times a year. All us kids spent every summer together, and we became lifelong friends as we grew up. Their son was one of my groomsmen, and my sister is godmother to their daughter's kids. So, while not in a position of catering to them, some weird things have happened over the years. 1. They don't pack when they travel. Their agent/people have prearranged either one of their homes or a home for them, plus guests. You'll get a call a few weeks ahead of time to come in for a sizing. You get to your room/guest house and the drawers are filled with outfits, shoes, etc., sized perfectly. They're yours to keep, all designer, latest fashion, etc. You just let the servants know what outfits you'll be keeping, and it's packed plus shipped to your place when the vacation is over. 2. Their dad has different cars at every home they have, specific to what roads he likes, what models he's interested in at the time, and the overall theme of the place. They literally have cars that serve the same as a poster to tie a room together. As the kids got older, they have the same. The daughter really loves Bentley and has one custom to each home in Spain, England, and the US. Their son had a thing for older Astons. Story 59. OMG, the list I've seen working in Marin County all my life. I dated a guy from a wealthy investment banker family. They sold their home in Ross and were building a new one on top of a hill in San Anselmo, overlooking a valley and hills, so they purchased a temp house that was likely priced in the low millions to stay until building was done. We were having dinner together in the temp house, and he made a joke about it, quote, being a dump. They all thought it was hilarious. Oh, and this was around the time Airbnb started cracking down on hosts declining guests on race. In his mind, this was a direct connection to, well, poor people steal more, so they should be allowed to discriminate. Yeah, it didn't last long between us. I worked for a billionaire who had adult kids. One of his sons and I had a mutual friend. To this day, the billionaire, who I'm still in touch with, has no idea that his son, and I, through our mutual friend, know about his secret children in another country. Same guy's daughter is getting married the same day as I this year. Coincidence. Difference is, my budget is $15,000 and hers is up to $800,000 and counting. She decided 12 weeks before the wedding that she, quote, doesn't want a wedding but a house instead. I'm sure he'll just get her the house too. Same girl has her LA beachfront home, car and bills all paid for 100% and an allowance of about $10,000 a month. She charges her fiancé rent. Poor bastard has no idea what's going on, nor what he's in for. She's driven away from gas stations with the hose still in the car at least twice. These are the things that happen when the help runs life for you. The best part about families like this is the wives' allowances. His wife's is about $30,000 a month. Several times she's purchased a single item of clothing over that price. Then she bills her husband for the extra cost. Yes, she literally sends an invoice to the family accountant. His reactions after finding out are priceless. Both sons are asked to have their wives sign a prenup less than 1 week before their weddings. That didn't go over well. Oh, one of the most common things rich people like to tell the lower class, just work for yourself, start your own business. Yeah, people are parenting your children and living with you because they can afford to start a business, let alone pay rent in the area. I didn't see a live black person until I was 23. I don't know why they share these things with me. Have you ever been in a home where every room has a theme? One was a jungle, one was tech/futuristic, one was Roman marble and gold, etc. I've been paid hundreds to sit and do nothing for hours. I've also been told a small business can't afford XYZ pay and benefits by people who own multi-million-dollar estates. Trey Cool is a fun and courteous guy who grows very yummy tomatoes in his yard. We met at a restaurant I worked at and had a friendly night out with live music and drinks. He was engaged soon after and texted me asking me to get him on the books at a restaurant to bring his lady the same night. I did so, and asked my boss to send them dessert on me as a congratulations because I wasn't working that day. Next day, I found out they didn't send the dessert. I asked why. I was told it was inappropriate. Apparently, hanging out with pop stars makes women in monogamous relationships' pants fall off. He was actually right. Trey and I both took a piss behind a dumpster at the 2 a.m. club that night. It was actually kind of punk rock. I assume George Lucas has stopped ordering 2 venti whole milk white mochas with extra whipped cream every Sunday. I was always worried he would have a heart attack before making a solid deal to sell, and all of us would lose great future content to Starbucks-induced artery failure. The wealthy can be terrible, but also amazing, weird, and fun. Story 60. I worked for a couple for about a year as their personal director of photography, as they called it, or basically a home video maker/live-in guest. One is a well-known supermodel and the other is a psychologist with clients such as A-list actors and famous musicians, along with the usual run-of-the-mill rich person. It was ironic that the family was in such disarray, being led by a shrink with such a reputation. Their kid is a future serial killer, doing things like cutting their friend with a knife they snuck into their school and smothering their dog with a pillow, trying to kill it. They both seem to have serious, undiagnosed ADHD and will not stop buying these pet projects like old trucks, boats, random wild pets like tigers, pigs, horses, and Bengals that they have no idea how to care for, before getting rid of them and moving on to the next one. They would pay me to stay at their house for 120 hours a week at $30 an hour, paid day and night. They would hand me their Amex Centurion cards and leave for a few days at a time. The main project they had me work on was their 5-year-old school project, which wasn't even a film project. It was an art project, like paintings. And the amount of crap they wanted took the whole year to complete, so that by the time we were done, the kid was already in the next grade and had missed the due date by a year. Overall, it helped me out financially because I had just moved to a new city, but it was also a huge waste of time. I could have furthered my career by a lot, but was wasting time filming a Star Wars remake with a little kid. Story 61. My mother's godfather went from rags to riches, and she told me the story of when she met him and visited his house in Cyprus. He was really interested in archaeology and actually to this day has the largest private collection of antiques and has contributed notably to the Metropolitan Museum in New York. In his mansion, he had a section about 400 squared centimeters in the area where he had all the pieces he decided to keep for himself instead of donating to the Metropolitan because he especially enjoyed them. There is an elevator to get to the second and third floor, and a small indoor garden to spruce up the place. Despite all this, he's still very humble and keeps humility. He's around 85 years old now, and doesn't remember my mother all too well, but he is a very sweet man. For those of you wondering how he became rich, he started off by buying a small chip which he used to transfer goods, slowly worked his way to making a big company, sold it, went to Cyprus and found and dug up archaeological sites, selling what he wanted to others. Soon enough, he had all the money he could dream of and a ton of antiques, so he donated many of them. I'll see if I can find any sources, but I can't promise anything. He was Greek, if that helps, if anyone wants to search it up. Story 62. I don't cater to the super rich, but my boss is super rich, and I've curried some favor with him, so he likes me in on certain things, which makes me privy to his frankly mad spending habits. I had just joined the company, and he was just shooting the crap, getting to know me, and talking about tech stuff, but specifically about crypto. And in the middle of the conversation, he just decided to say, F it, I'm going to buy in. I calmly said to him, look dude, crypto is about to get banned in China. The price is going to fall through the floor. I don't think it's a good idea to buy in right now. He didn't listen, bought anyway, and lost 2 million euros in the course of a few weeks. He didn't say he lost anything at the time, I just saw the price of crypto crash. I felt super awkward for him, thinking he might blame me for not standing up to him enough. But nope, he laughed it off, came clean about his losses, really appreciated my input, said he thought he could now trust me, and said, you're a smart guy. I like to surround myself with smart guys so I don't make stupid decisions again. Here, have a bonus. And so, pledged to add 2K on top of my bonus for the end of this year. I've never seen a human wantonly throw cash around like that before. Story 63. Before getting my ABSN, I went to undergrad at a super expensive, top-tier university with the intention of becoming a lawyer. I was full ride from a piss-poor family out in the boondocks of West Virginia, where we never took any vacations/traveled. While there, I had a professor tell me I had to meet their friend, we'll call him Bob, who was an alumni from the university and grew up near the area I was from. This guy wasn't the 1% or anything, but definitely had more money than I'll ever see in my life as an RN. Him and his wife go on to become great friends and supporters, I think largely because their own daughters were pretty horrible/selfish. Fast forward, I got married my junior year of college. My partner and I wanted to elope, and I told Bob. He was furious at the notion of me eloping instead of having a proper wedding. As a broke junior in college, I told him I couldn't pay for a wedding, and that all my partner and I wanted was a nice honeymoon. At this point, Bob tells me he's going to pay for my wedding so that I'll have one. So, unbelievably, he did. Bob and his wife planned our entire wedding, bought my dress, catered the event, booked the venue, etc., and paid for the majority of our honeymoon to Spain and Greece. I've met a lot of ultra-wealthy people who are just absolute pricks, but people like Bob can completely change someone's life, and I think a few of them know that. Bob grew up extremely poor as well, and I think he just wanted to give me what he wishes he had been able to have. Since Bob and his wife are older, I don't know if he'll live to see his own daughters get married, and I'm sure that played into it as well. My partner and I still go to see Bob and his wife about once a year. At this point, they're more like family. Story 64. I install elevators, the real ones, dig buildings, hotels, stadiums, etc. One time, I got sent out for a job and the address was in the money area in town. I've had this before where the billing address got switched with the actual building address, so I called the office. They verified it was correct. It was a personal residence, a 6K square foot house that they were putting an addition on. The addition was 32K square feet. It had a full-size basketball court, garage for 30 plus cars, and a 5-stop. A legit elevator going on. Okay, no big deal. I showed up, and it was just like working on any other job site. As it was about done, it finally dawned on me that as a personal residence, it wouldn't need to go through all the inspection procedures of a commercial building. I tracked down the guy I had assumed was the general contractor, as he had been doing all the coordination between the different trades, and asked him if he knew how the owner wanted to handle the turnover. And he said when it's done, just give him the keys and a quick lesson on how everything works. I said I usually do the turnover directly to the customer, so there's no middleman on that stuff, and that's when he said he was the owner. I had been dealing with him for 2 weeks and had never suspected he was being his own general contractor. Story 65. When I was a teenager, I did some IT work for an infamous Middle Eastern man, deceased, known variously as an activist, nationalist, or political leader, depending on who you ask. We flew into Jordan. We were greeted at the airport by 6 to 8 trucks and about 30 men, armed with AKs and submachine guns. They insisted on loading all our gear, but when it came time to depart, one of the men told us that we either have to ride in the back of the truck with no windows, or we had to have a bag over our head. We opted for the windowless truck, which was air-conditioned. He insisted it was for our safety and explained that their enemies might try to capture and torture us if they thought we knew the location of this compound, which is now widely known. So we traveled for about 2 hours with a couple of uncomfortable stops where they would talk to someone outside and you could hear a distinct tap, tap on the back as if we were waved through a checkpoint. When we reached the destination and exited the truck, we were already inside of a very large walled compound. Our job was installing a sort of cellular-type phone service for them to use locally. It was only after a whole week working and completing our tasks that we finally met the big man himself. He greeted us like family. He was very excited to have guests and excited to use his new wireless phone service. He invited us into his personal quarters, which was quite unexciting for someone who was a billionaire. He had lots of books and very few luxury items other than a few gold pieces, guns, and a few paintings that were nice, value unknown. The three of us, a cousin and uncle of mine, left with nearly $50K total for 1 week's worth, and he gave my uncle a solid gold eagle weighing several ounces. My uncle inquired about its origin because it looked similar to Federalist decor and nearly Nazi in appearance. Our host explained that it was locally made from the late 1800s. They speculated that it may have been for export. He asked my uncle if he liked it, and when my uncle confirmed, he just handed it to him. My uncle initially tried to refuse, but our host simply said something like, "It's only an object, and I have many objects. If this object pleases you, then it pleases me for you to have it." We spent almost a whole day just socializing with him, and he seemed happy to host Americans. When we got back to the US, he had dropped another almost 10K each into our bank account. Sorry, I can't give the name. Humble AF, despite the fact that he could flex harder than most countries. Story 66. I used to work at an expensive skin/body/hair care store. One day, this girl came in, probably in her mid-ish 20s, and was just kind of browsing. I asked if there was anything I could help her find, and she started asking me questions about the products directly in front of us, which were the most expensive in the store. 50 milliliter creams go for around $130. And before I could even finish answering, she was like, "Great, I'll take it." She bought just about every item in the line and then went through the rest of the store with me, asking questions and buying just about everything I suggested, which was a wild experience for me as someone who's been in retail forever. When we finally reached the counter, it totaled a little over $1,000. I had to ask her name to look up her profile in the system, and she tells me her last name Bacardi. After she left, I had to look it up for myself. She was in fact the descendant of the founder of the Bacardi Company, which in addition to Bacardi rum, also makes Grey Goose, Patron, and Dewar's. The Bacardi family net worth is about $19 billion. She was honestly really nice and seemed pretty down to earth, especially for a literal heiress. Most of what she got was gifts for other people. Story 67. I'm going through this right now. I'm poor but have a horse. Horses are expensive, but I make it work. Get this. 2020, I'm boarding my horse at a fancy barn during a pandemic because I don't have many choices at that point. I won't get into it. I pay about a third of my paycheck to make sure my horse is safe and being exercised. I do this while I try to sort my life out. F 2020. Turns out my horse wasn't being trained or exercised, but the rich owners assured me they would make it up to me. Said I could stay with them for cheap rent, work for cheaper boarding. Long story short, I was scammed again. They told me I wasn't profitable enough and gave my living quarters away. In short, the facility stole my money, gave me an opportunity to live for cheap rent on the condition I work there, and then gave away my living quarters without letting me know. I tried to leave a review on Yelp, an honest one, gave praises and 2 stars, but they sent folk to remove my review. I witnessed animal cruelty as a client and saw the grave of cattle they had due to mistreatment. A horse died on the facility and the owner whipped a horse for no reason. He actually hit her. I'm bummed I didn't leave a review right away. I was trying to be objective, but I guess it's conflict of interest since I was an employee. Rich folks suck. So I didn't even know that it was possible nor legal. I still don't think it's legal for you to pay someone off to remove a review off of Yelp or online for a service. That seems like a clear violation. Story 68. Good friends with the owner of a company that supplies live-like tool equipment to power companies for repairs of the electrical grid. This industry is about getting crap there quick, and when you say. That means if they're on top of a mountain, you charter a helicopter and have that crap fast roped down to them. This owner was the best at this, and he's personable. First time I met him, we went outside of Chicago to dinner with my dad, and Dad told me this guy was rich. Well, I grew up on a res, and rich has always been a non-quantifiable term. At the time, rich to me was not having to check your bank account before you went grocery shopping. I was getting into the industry to do inspections on the equipment for these companies. So anyways, we meet at some casino, and I always played slots, never craps. This guy was teaching me how it worked. It's important to note that he wasn't using chips either. They were ceramic rectangles and not round. I didn't think anything of it. Didn't look at them either as I was paying attention to what he said. So he says, "You think you got it now?" I said, "I guess." And he pushes them all in front of me while the pit boss is watching and he nods at me and him. So rich dude says, "It's your show, win the house," then walks away with my dad. I start betting on the pass line and winning, stacking these little rectangles up until I lose a hand. Went like 8 times where I won. I toss the dealer a rectangle like a baller. She looks at me and says, "Thank you so much." I didn't think anything of it, and go and find him and my dad and say I played till I lost. He laughed and said, "You lost it all?" I said, "No way," and handed him the chips back. He said, "Nah, you keep them." I was not having that, and said, "They're yours." He smiled and said, "Okay, but you keep this one." Put one in my hand. I think it was purple and white, but can't remember. We go and leave, and I cash it out. She hands me a form to put my deets on, like social security number and name kind of crap. I said, "What is this?" And she said that anything over $1,200 has to be reported as income. I said, "How much is this then?" She pulls a band out and says, "10K, sir." I crap a purple ferret. I was in a high limit room, come to find out, betting 10 to 20K a roll, and handed him back over 150K. I got the money and went back to the door where he was, and was all hush-hush whisper saying, "You gave me enough to buy a goddamn car." He laughed and said, "So? You earned it, kiddo." I never took his money again, but watched him go to the same casino later and drop 500K on a single hand of blackjack. To lose it, and he didn't bat an eye. He had a son that was his world, but grew up in the life and got hooked on heroin to OD in Gary, Indiana one day. I met him once and he wasn't a dick, but that life of excess just F's people, I guess. He and I talk still. Matter of fact, I bought him dinner recently to pay him back, as when I was on the road during my early days, I was penny to penny, and he got my lunch as it was that or gas in my tank to keep warm when I slept in it. Sacrifice to make a LLC, people. He gladly took me up on my offer and said that he was proud to see me making it from where I was 2 years ago. I used the money he gave me to start my LLC and fund the account to open under its name. It is all still there as well, in case he needs it back. I showed him too, because I never did feel right about getting it, and said I can have it back. He recently stepped down from that company to make it employee-owned as well. Now he just drives around the USA seeing where he ends up. His wife left him, kid is dead of an OD, and really doesn't have friends that won't use him for his wealth, except my dad and I. He's a lonely dude that got money, but lost damn near everything else. Story 69. Worked as a waiter in an extremely high-class restaurant in Los Angeles. Hollywood bigwigs came often. I've served Brad Pitt, Will Smith, and Martin Scorsese. Even though they're incredibly wealthy and difficult customers who often want preferential seating and serving, god damn, they are mediocre tippers. Will Smith gave me a $20 tip for a $400 meal. I'm still pissed. I've served my fair share of obnoxiously rich, non-famous people. Everyone wants to feel special. Majority of them are rude. Some never leave a tip. Many come to the restaurant with different women or men every night. I've seen people getting coked out in the bathroom. I've also been tipped very graciously. One time, someone left a $500 tip for a drink in a conversation. I grew up poor. I'm a young man working the restaurant industry. It's less about the food and more about catering to the customer experience. And when the customer base is incredibly wealthy, well, it can get very difficult. Story 70. Worked at a retail market on a coastal island where a lot of millionaires own getaway houses. Had a dumb female dog stand there and whine to me about how hard it was having to buy toilet paper for the 2 houses she owns. Apparently, the person who did that for her was out of state. When she saw the flat expression on my face, she made this pathetic sound and said, "You don't know what it's like." To me, the girl living in subsidized housing making $8.50 an hour. Another multimillionaire, or whatever you want to call them, was down on the island for a funeral. Had a huge party with him, and he was having the best time bragging about what a massive blowout they were going to have. Never seen so many people so happy to go to a funeral. The story was obviously hilarious to them too, and somehow the most exciting thing. He was apparently feeling frisky and talking to the local squalor by visiting. Scandalous. After having me pack up over 50 bottles of wine and assloads of groceries, grabbing candy off the checkout shelf like a child, he looked like he wanted to strike me in the face when his card was declined. It wasn't declined, but the bank had locked it because he was out of state. He got it unlocked, then ran, and I got the whole "that's effing right" speech like it'd been my fault. I will never forget his expression because no human being had ever gazed upon me with that level of disgust. I may as well have been a roach that flew in his face. Naturally, he had the staff escort him out to pack up his things in the rental. These people are completely out of touch with reality and always manage to make you feel like a filthy animal just being in their presence. I don't believe owning that much money is even ethical. It's disgusting. Story 72. I handle the tech needs of the very wealthy in NYC. $100,000 dining room table, $1.5 million television, $10,000 hair salon visits, $35,000 diamond-encrusted Android phone, replaced with newer model every few months / new release, $30,000 executive desk, $15,000 laptop with artwork laminated on its cover, endless $1 million redecorations of house every 2 years. What I can say is, it's always a crap show. Everyone around them always inventing ways to steal from them, and the rich hubby is always immersing themselves in work commitments and accolades to avoid bored trophy housewife, and they're always cheating with a young piece of ass who rides the gravy train. Meanwhile, bored trophy housewife always is obsessed with spending tons of money on her looks and surrounding herself with sycophants who are willing to do most everything for her on a whim, which in turn makes her become even more useless as they don't learn how to do anything for themselves. And 9 times out of 10, there's always a gay male bestie guru lingering around the wife, who always quietly takes control of their lives, collecting gossip about their relationship, subtly influencing their life choices, and the exorbitant spending, which he has a nice little kickback scheme in place with every dollar wastefully spent. And hubby keeps paying the bill, and he considers the gay bestie non-threatening, keeps the wife at bay and happy while he plays. One gay bestie of housewife we know is playing 2 ends of the game. He plays a sympathetic ear to the neglected housewife, then sets up escorts he's friends with the hubby, unbeknownst to both the hubby and housewife. He gets kickbacks on the scam and keeps the housewife constantly sullen with wine and meds, which makes her feel hopelessly even more dependent on him. One thing's for sure, if I ever make it big, I would still live humble and never let anyone know how wealthy I am. Story 73. Worked at a camp on Catalina. We had this guy who would come into the family camp at the end of the summer with his tricked out sailboat. He always came alone, I presume because he was divorced and his kids were adults. He had a custom polo with the name of his boat on it and he couldn't operate it. He called it a Cowstow tribute boat, which basically meant he'd named it the Halcyon. He literally one time bragged about overpaying for it. He'd force us to run an auction for sail cruises during the week to support the Ocean Future Society. No one wanted to sail with him. OFS didn't really want or need a few $100 he'd raise, and he really struggled to dock or tie up his boat. One time, he comes into dock and forgets to drop his mainsail in about a 7-knot wind. So I and every other camp counselor around are desperately trying to secure him to the cleats as his boat is trying to run up on shore. The poor family he'd manipulated into going out with him looked terrified. He couldn't pick up mooring buoys either, so every time he wanted to come in, we would send out our staff on a whaler to help him. One time, I'm on his boat, hauling in a hawser as fast as I can, and I slice my hand on some barnacles. He declares, "You're bleeding." I ignore this and quickly move to the aft of the boat to secure it, and he abandons the helm, whips a rag out, and starts dabbing up my blood from the deck. I've never in my life felt less valued as a person. I'm literally bleeding to help you tie up your stupid boat, and you're pausing the process in wind and in front of guests to make sure your deck isn't messy. I saw a lot of drunken, snobby yachties in Catalina, but no one came close to that guy. Story 74. I was in college at a juniorish Ivy League type school. One Saturday I'm in the cafeteria eating before heading to work. This girl who lived below me walks up and asks if she may sit. She was an African woman with the most beautiful British-like accent. She notices the basketball team eating before practice and acting goofy. She very quietly and politely launches into some very disturbing comments about African Americans. Used words to the degree of, in her country, her father would own people like that. I was shocked. Didn't know what to say, so I segued into asking what her father did. She says he's in the government. I said, "What does he do in the government?" She corrected me that he is the government. I became a little less scared of this woman at that moment. So Midwest boy in me asks, "So what's that like?" She responds with her prim and proper accent, "You know that film with the black funny man who comes here to work in fast food?" I said, "You mean Coming to America?" She said, "Yes, that first part with the servants and animals and such. That's pretty much my life, really." She was very sweet, other than her open hostility toward African Americans. I spoke with her roommate later to see if she was blowing smoke about her life. Her roommate was like, "No, she isn't bullcrapping." She showed me pictures of her pet giraffe and elephant. She wanted a car and told her dad. She said, "I crap you not, her dad called the Mercedes dealership and bought one of each model they had. Told them to ship him whichever ones she doesn't want." Story 75. I know people who work on super yachts who have some good stories. I'm just trying to remember some of them, but I'm drawing a bit of a blank. There was the yacht that had a fish tank that ran up the entire length of the staircase and was packed full of fish. The problem was that there was also a shark in there, so every week it'd eat all the fish. Every week they'd get another $50,000 worth of fish to put in. My friend Danny cooked for a Mexican billionaire on his yacht. The billionaire liked one specific brand of tin chili, so he was paying top dollar for his own private chef to essentially open tins of chili for him. Danny spent the summer doing a lot of coke and banging the billionaire's daughter. Another friend of mine who isn't a very good chef, but is a massive blagger, managed to get a job cooking for Claudia Scheffler and Matthew Vaughn in London. He said he quit after a week because he didn't like Vaughn, but we're all pretty certain he got sacked. We've cooked for the rich, but not the super rich. Big-time lawyers, a Canadian government minister, people high up in the US Army, and I don't really have any interesting stories of my own. My most successful chef friend has a regular job down in Monaco working for someone who really is the ultra-rich. He's American, and I think his money comes from power stations or something like that. My friend is always sending us videos of him taking the guy's cars for a drive. He has one of the largest supercar collections in the world. He said there's a drawer in the kitchen full of keys. Literally, just full of car keys. He said the only one he's not allowed to take out is the McLaren F1. He's cooked for some super famous people as well. Again, I'm drawing a blank, and the only one I can remember is Phil Collins, but I don't think there were any good stories. He's just headed back to Monaco, otherwise I'd go for a drink with him later and try to get you all some good stories. He was meant to cook for Queens of the Stone Age at a castle they were staying at, but I don't think that ever happened.